started with our exterior pre-trip inspection. First things first, I'm gonna check underneath the truck, make sure there's no leaks, that it's not leaning from one side to the other. If it's leaning from one side to the other, that can show that I have a suspension problem or a flat tire. From there, I'll start with my lights. The top corner lights are my marker lights. The marker lights measure the height, the width, and the length of the vehicle. The three lights in the center are my ID lights. ID lights indicate that it's a commercial vehicle. I have my right and my left turn signals, also used as my emergency flashers. My headlights, high beams for the country, low beams for the city. Fog lights, only used in foggy conditions. My stop lights in the back, they should be working properly. At this time, you guys are going to ask the examiner to help you check your lights. Right? So you tell the examiner, can you help me check the lights? They're going to tell you to get on the truck, and they're going to tell you, you're going to tell them which one you're turning on. Okay? Once you do that, you get back out and you're going to tell the examiner, okay, I'm checking my lights to make sure there's no crack, broken, no missing lenses, no burned out bulbs. The lights are amber in color in the front, red in color in the back. Right? Amber is the color of caution. From there, I check the windshield. My windshield should be clean, not cracked, broken, no illegal stickers. The weather stripping around the windshield is not ripped or torn to prevent any air or water going into the cab. My windshield wipers are not cracked or broken, or missing parts. Wiper blades are not ripped or torn, free of any debris to prevent scratches on my windshield. At that point, you guys are going to open up the hood. Everybody knows where to open the hood from? Yes, sir. Start off on the passenger side of the truck, and we're going to start with the fluids. On this side I have my coolant. We have 4 types of fluids. I got my coolant or water, I have my power steering, my engine oil, and my windshield washer fluid on the other side. I would check the fluids to make sure that they're all at the proper level. The reservoirs are not cracked or broken. All the caps are on there, tied and secured, are not missing. I'm also checking for any possible leaks by checking underneath the truck on the ground. From there, I'm going to check my water pump. The easiest way to find the water pump, I follow the biggest hose that comes out of the radiator. Right, it leads me straight to the pump. My water pump's not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. It should have a full set of nuts and bolts, tied and secure, and not missing. I'm also checking to see if there's any possible leaks by checking underneath the truck on the ground. From there, I'll check my air compressor. This here's my air compressor. I'm going to check the air compressor to make sure it's not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Nuts and bolts, full set, tied and secure, and not missing. I'm checking the air lines to make sure there's no cuts, cracks, or bulges. Clamps are properly tightened, listening for air leaks. My air compressor and my water pump are both gear driven, meaning that it doesn't need a belt in order for it to operate. From there, I'd go on to the driver's side of the truck. Okay, on my driver's side, here I got my power steering fluid. I have my engine oil. Here's where I will pour. Here's where I check. This is my windshield washer fluid. Once again, I'm checking the fluids to make sure that they're at the proper level. The reservoirs are not cracked or broken. All my caps are on there, tight and secured. Checking for leaks underneath the truck on the ground. From there, I would check my alternator. I'm going to check the alternator to make sure it's not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Nuts and bolts, full set, tight and secure, not missing. Making sure there's no bare wires. Any bare wires will cause a short. If there's any bare wires, they need to be replaced. My power steering pump. To find the power steering pump, I follow the hose that comes out of the power steering reservoir. Right, so I follow it and it leads me to back in here. Right, I'm checking the power steering pump to make sure it's not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Nuts and bolts, full set, tight and secure, not missing. I'm also checking for any possible leaks by checking underneath the truck on the ground. My alternator and my power steering pump are both belt driven. Right? I'm gonna check the belts. I'm gonna check the belt to make sure they're not too tight or too loose. If they're too tight, they can snap, rip, or damage the bearings of the truck. If too loose, they're gonna slip off and not work properly. The proper adjustment is 3/4 of an inch of play at the center of the belt between my 2 pulleys. From there, I would check my hoses and air lines. I'm gonna check all my hoses, right? All my air lines here to make sure there's no cuts, cracks, no bulges. All the clamps are properly tightened, listening for air leaks, and also checking for fluid leaks underneath the truck on the ground. From here, I'd go on to the front suspension, starting off with the spring mount. I got my spring mount here. I'm gonna check the spring mount to make sure it's not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Tied secure to the chassis with its full set of nuts and bolts. I'm checking my leaf springs. I should have a full set of leaf springs, not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. My U-bolts right here. I got my U-bolts. Make sure the U-bolts are tied secure with its full set of nuts and bolts, not cracked, broken, or illegally welded on. Right? If you guys don't know what they are, step up so I can show you guys. Okay, you good, Alfonso? Good, good? Don't be shy. So spring mount right here.
Yeah.
Leaf springs, U-bolts. Alright. Right now I'm gonna start with the mounting pad here and then end with the rubber stopper. Alright, so after the U-bolts, I'm gonna go on to the mounting pad. The mounting pad is not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Put in its proper place. My rubber stopper prevents any metal to metal contact. I'm gonna check the shock absorber. To make sure it's not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. That there's no signs of any grease or oil leaking from it. That shows that it's worn out. I'm checking the nuts and bolts to make sure they're properly tightened and not missing. If it's leaking, it will have to be replaced. From there, I'll go on to check on my steering rod. You check the steering rod to make sure it's not cracked, bent, or broken. It should have no more than 2 inches of play. Right? I'm checking to make sure the U-joints are well lubricated, not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. My steering box, the steering box is not cracked, broken, or illegally welded, tied secure to the chassis with its full set of nuts and bolts. Checking the hoses to make sure there's no cuts, cracks, or bulges. Clamps are properly tightened. Checking for leaks on the part and underneath the truck on the ground. After the power steering box, I go on to the steering linkage. The steering linkage consists of the pitman arm, the drag link, my swing arm, and the tie rod end is the one that goes across. Right, so pitman arm, drag link, swing arm, tie rod end. These 4 parts should not be cracked, broken, or illegally welded. The joints, checking the joints to make sure that they're always lubricated, not missing. The castle bolts should be tied secure with the cotter pin going through it. Right, if that cotter pin's not there, we gotta make sure we put some. From there, we go on to the brake chamber. I got my brake chamber right here. The brake chamber should not be cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Tied secure to the axle with its full set of nuts and bolts. I'm checking the clamp that's around it. Should not be cracked or broken or loose. Make sure that it has a complete set of nuts and bolts. I'm also checking the airline. Checking the airline to make sure there's no cuts, cracks, or bulges. Clamps are properly tied and listening for air leaks. From there, I'd go on to check the push rod slack adjuster. Turn it on and turn the wheel all the way to the left. So was everybody able to see this in here? Or not really?
Yeah. No. Where is the tie rod?
This is the tie rod right back here. Down there.
Oh, okay, I see it.
After the tie rod is your brake chamber, right? Airline. Now we're at the push rod slack adjuster. Alright, so this right here is your push rod. There. This here is your slack adjuster. Okay? They should both not be cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Make sure it's not loose in any way. We're checking the cotter pins in here. The cotter pins should be locked and secured and not missing. The push rod slack adjuster should have no more than 1 inch of play with the brakes off. If I have more than 1 inch of play, I grab an open 9/16 wrench and go down here to the adjusting nut. When getting to the adjusting nut, I do a full turn circle clockwise until it stops, and once it stops, a quarter turn back. When I'm done adjusting the brake here, I adjust the brakes on the other side to brake evenly. From here, I will go on to check my brake drums. Right, when we check the brake drums, we're checking through the ventilation window on the rim. Right, this is the brake drum. I'm checking the brake drum to make sure it's not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. And I'm checking for 4 things. White powder. Any white powder indicates that my brakes overheated and a fire extinguisher was used. Black powder. Any black powder indicates metal-to-metal contact. Third, my brake pads. The brake pads should have no less than 1/4 inch of life left in them, which they're in here. Alright, and I'm looking for any oil or grease. Any oil or grease on my brake drum shows that my inner axle seal is leaking and it has to be replaced. Okay, from there we go on to the steers, my front tires. Right, so the steers, we're making sure there's no cuts, cracks, or bulges, no nails or screws to prevent a flap. My tire tread should be no less than 4/32. Recaps are not permitted. A recap is when they use the base of the tire and they add a new thread on top. Right, we don't want those in the front. The air pressure on my tire, 85 to 100 psi, or what's recommended by its manufacturer. From there, we go on to check the rim. I'm gonna check the rim and wheel. So this is the rim, this is the wheel. Right, it should not be cracked, broken, bent, no illegal welds, free of any dents. Checking the lug nuts, make sure we have a full set of lug nuts, that there's no rust in between the lug nuts. If there's any rust, that indicates that they're loose and have to be tightened. My hub seal is not cracked or broken, not leaking any oil. If it's leaking any oil, it has to be replaced. Right? From there, I check the valve stem. My valve stem's down here. My valve stem not touching the rim, not cracked or broken. The cap is on there, tight and secure, listening for air leaks. Okay. Questions so far? No? Good? Alright. That right there, what we just covered, is Form A. Okay, they call that Form A. Okay, now we're going to start Form B. Alright, so the door. We're going to check our door, make sure the door opens, closes properly. Right, I'm checking the door latch. Checking the door latch to make sure it's not cracked or broken. Right? It's well lubricated. Our rubber seal on the door, the weather seal is not ripped or torn to prevent any air or water going into the cab. My door hinges, make sure they're properly mounted with this full set of nuts and bolts, not cracked or broken. Checking the mirrors. The mirrors should be properly secured to the truck. Make sure that the glass is clean, well adjusted, and no illegal stickers. From there, I'm going to check my steps. These are my steps. And this is my catwalk. Right, I'm making sure that they're both clean, free of any oil, water, or grease to prevent self-injuries, not cracked or broken, no illegal welds on it. From there, I would check my fuel tank. Right, I'm checking the fuel tank to make sure it's not cracked or broken. There's no holes, right, to prevent a leak from happening. I'm checking for leaks underneath the truck on the ground. My fuel straps, the fuel straps should be tied and secured around the fuel tank, properly mounted to the chassis with its full set of nuts and bolts, not cracked, broken, or illegally welded on. I'm checking the rubber strip in between the fuel strap and the fuel tank to make sure it's not ripped, torn, or missing to prevent any metal-to-metal contact. My fuel cap should open and close properly. When closed, it should be locked and secure. I should have a rubber gasket in there and a T-chain connected at the bottom of the cap. I also have a hose that connects this tank to the other, which is called a crossover fuel line. It should be free of cuts, cracks, and bulges, clamps tight and secure, and checking for leaks underneath the truck on the ground. Next up would be my chassis. Check the chassis from beginning to end to make sure that it's not cracked, broken, or illegally welded, that it's maintained nice and straight. Right, I'm checking my cross members. My cross members should be properly secured to the chassis with its full set of nuts and bolts, not cracked, broken, or illegally welded on. From there, we'll check my drive shaft. If you guys look right here in the center, that looks like the tube, right? That's your drive shaft. We're checking the drive shaft to make sure it's not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. At both ends, we have U-joints. We're going to check those U-joints to make sure that they're well lubricated, not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. My U-joint to the front is connected to the transmission. My transmission's not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Also making sure that it's not leaking any transmission oil. If it's leaking transmission oil, it has to be replaced. Right, also going to make sure that it has a complete set of nuts and bolts. My U-joint to the back is connected to the differential. Right, my differential is not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Full set of nuts and bolts and not leaking any gear oil. If it's leaking gear oil, it has to be replaced. From there, we're going to go on to check our exhaust. I have a stack, a muffler, an elbow, and a flex. These four components are not cracked, broken, no illegal welds. The very top of the stack, there should be no signs of black soot. Any black soot, that indicates that the truck's leaking excessive fumes. On the muffler, the clamp should be tight and secured around it so that it's not loose. The elbow and the flex free of any holes so that fumes will go into the cab, causing us to get sick. And from there, we go on to check our air lines and electrical cable. We have our red emergency, blue service, green electrical. They should not be too long or too short. If too long, they're up against the chassis, you get tangled with the drive shaft and get ruined. If too short, as I'm making a turn, they're going to snap off the trailer and my brakes are going to lock. Right, I want to make sure that there's no cuts, cracks, or bulges. Clamps at both ends are properly tightened, listening for air leaks. My glad hands, which are these, checking the glad hands to make sure that they're not cracked, broken, or illegally welded, properly connected. Inside I have a rubber gasket that should not be ripped or torn to prevent an air leak from happening. I'm listening for air leaks. Right here, my electric, I want to make sure that it's properly inserted, right, so that all the lights are working properly. I want to make sure that it's not cracked or broken or missing. No bare wires to prevent a short. My connectors, which are these, I'm making sure that the connectors here have no cuts, cracks, or bulges, clamps tight and secure, listening for air leaks. On the electric, same thing, not cracked or broken. Make sure it's properly inserted so that the lights are working properly. From there, I go on to check my fifth wheel. Okay. Now my fifth wheel will start off with this airline. Right, so this airline right here is from my fifth wheel. That's what it's able to help the fifth wheel slide forward and back. Right, want to make sure that there's no cuts, cracks, or bulges. Clamps are tight and secured, listening for air leaks. The fifth wheel structure. Right, I'm checking the fifth wheel structure to make sure it's not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Tight and secured to the chassis with its full set of nuts and bolts. From there, I go on over here to the top of my fifth wheel. This here is my platform. This here is my pickup apron. They should both be well lubricated, not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Inside of the fifth wheel, I have my locking jaws. Those locking jaws should not be cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Tight and secured around the kingpin. The kingpin is the shaft that comes down from the trailer. That kingpin should not be cracked, broken, crooked in any way, so that there's no problem with the locking jaws grabbing it. There should exist no gap in between the platform and the skid plate. If I see any type of daylight, that shows that I'm not properly hooked up. My release arm, which is this, my release arm should be put in the lock position at all times, especially when the trailer is hooked up to it. This fifth wheel is a sliding fifth wheel, so I want to make sure that it's locked in place so that it's not sliding on its own. Right, the fifth wheel should be properly mounted to the chassis with this full set of nuts and bolts, not cracked, broken, or illegally welded on. From there, I move on to the drives, right? So the same exact thing I did on my steers, I will do again right here on my drives. So I'm gonna start with my suspension. Okay, so right here I got my spring mounts. I'm gonna check the spring mounts to make sure that it's tight and secured to the chassis with this full set of nuts and bolts, not cracked, broken, or illegally welded on. My leaf springs, I should have a full set of leaf springs, not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. I have my U-bolts, which are in the same spot in the center. The U-bolts should not be cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Nuts and bolts, full set, tight and secured, and not missing. Our mounting pad, not cracked, broken, or illegally welded, put in its proper place. Right here I have my shock absorber. My shock absorber is tight and secured to the chassis with its full set of nuts and bolts, not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. It should not be leaking any grease or oil. If it is, it has to be replaced because it's worn out. Next up will be my airbag. I'm checking the airbag to make sure that it's fully inflated, no cuts, cracks, or bulges, listening for any possible air leaks. From here I go on to the brake chamber. The brake chamber's up here in the front, bottom. I'm checking the brake chambers to make sure it's not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. The clamps are tight and secured around it with this full set of nuts and bolts, tight and secured. The airlines connected to the brake chambers, not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Also making sure that I'm listening for any possible air leaks. The clamp should be on there, tight and secured. After my brake chamber, I move on to the push rod slack adjuster, which is right in front of it. Push rod slack adjuster is not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Cotter pins are locked and secured and not missing. Should have no more than 2 inches of play with the brakes off. Right, if I have more than 2 inches of play, I'll grab an open 9/16 wrench, go to the adjusting nut, full turn circle clockwise until it stops, and once it stops, a quarter turn back. Once I'm done adjusting the brakes on this side, I adjust them on the other side to brake evenly. If the examiner asks you why you're allowed 2 inches of play back here, because you have dual chambers. Right, up there in the front is only 1 brake chamber, back here is 2 chambers. Right, so that's why you're allowed more slack. Okay. After the push rod slack adjuster, we go on to the brake drum. We're checking in here for the brake drum. Brake drum's not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Checking for the same 4 things. Any white powder indicates that the brakes overheated and a fire extinguisher was used. Black powder, any black powder indicates metal to metal contact. Third, my brake pads. The brake pads should have no less than a quarter inch of life left. Right, any oil or grease will show that the inner axle seal is leaking and it has to be replaced. From there, we go on to check the actual tires. My drive tires, I'm making sure there's no cuts, cracks, no bulges, no nose or screws to prevent a flat. Right, I'm checking the tire tread to make sure it's no less than 2/32. Recaps back here are permitted. Right, the air pressure on my tires, 85 to 100 psi, or what's recommended by its manufacturer. I'm also checking the spacing between the 2 tires to make sure it's free of any wood, bottles, trash, etc. The rim, I'm checking the rim. Make sure the rim's not cracked or broken. There's no illegal welds. Lug nuts, full set of lug nuts. Any rust indicates that they're loose. If there's loose lug nuts, they have to be tightened. The hub seal's not cracked or broken or leaking any oil. If it is, it has to be replaced. I also have my valve stem right there. My valve stem not touching the rim is not cracked or broken. Cap is on there, tight and secured, and I'm listening for any possible air leaks. From here, we go on to the mud flaps. Okay, I'm checking the mud flaps to make sure they're not too long or too short. If too long, the rim against the ground and get ruined. If too short, they don't work its purpose. Recommended adjustment, 6 inches off the ground. Right, I'm checking the stoplights in the back. It should be the color red. No crack broken, no missing lenses, no burned out bulbs. All right, so right now we just finished doing Form B. Okay, Form B would be everything we just did except the airlines. Okay, now we're gonna start Form C. So Form C, they call it the coupling, right? The coupling is starting from your airlines to your fifth wheel to the trailer, okay? So now we're gonna start with the trailer. Now we're gonna check the front of the trailer, which is called the header board. Should not be cracked or broken, no illegal welds, no holes on my wood. I'm gonna check to make sure that my lights are amber in the color in the front, red in color in the back. No crack broken, no missing lenses, no burned out bulbs. We're looking at the side of the trailer. The side of the trailer should be nice and straight, not crack broken, no illegal welds. Any reflective tape should not be ripped or torn. Any plastic reflectors like this should be amber in color in the front, red in the back, not cracked or broken. Next up would be the landing gear. We're taking the landing gear to make sure that it's properly mounted with its full set of nuts and bolts, not cracked, broken, or illegally welded on. I'm looking at the supports to make sure they're not cracked or broken or illegally welded. It has its complete set of nuts and bolts. The landing gear arm is on the other side. That's what brings up the legs and brings it back down. It should be in a locked position so it's not swinging as I'm driving. The legs should go up and down evenly at the same time. When they're not in use, it should be all the way to the top. The boot's not cracked, broken, or illegally welded, and it shouldn't be loose, right? Give it a good kick. Right, if it doesn't fall off, it's not loose. Right, from there we check the undercarriage of the trailer. All right, checking the undercarriage on the trailer. We've got the cross beams right here. Right, these cross beams are not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Right, tight and secured. We want to make sure that the floor panels, there's no holes or any missing panels. If there is, we have to get those replaced. Right, we also have an airline and electrical cable that runs from the front to the back. Those airline and electrical cable, no cuts, cracks, or bulges. Clamps are tight and secure, listening for air leaks. On the electric, no bare wires to prevent a short. From there, we go on to the rears. Now the same thing we did here on the rears, the same thing we did on the drives, we're going to do right here on the rears. So we're going to start with the suspension again. Spring mount. Right, the spring mount's not cracked, broken, right? It shouldn't be illegally welded back here. We're going to make sure that our leaf springs, we have a full set of leaf springs, they're not cracked or broken, no illegal welds. We have our U-bolts, the U-bolts should be tight and secure with this full set of nuts and bolts, not cracked, broken, or illegally welded on. Mounting pad put in its proper place, not cracked, broken, no illegal welds. From there I go on to check my torque bar. This is this. So this one that is here and the one that goes across. Right, I'm checking the torque bar. What it does, it keeps the trailer going in a straight line, and it's also used as a weight stabilizer. It should not be cracked, broken, or illegally welded, and it should have a full set of nuts and bolts. From there I will go on to check the brake chamber, right? The brake chamber is down here. Back here the brake chamber is not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. The clamp is tight and secure and not missing. Airline, no cuts, cracks, or bulges, listening for air leaks. My push rod slack adjuster is not cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Full set of nuts and bolts, cotter pin locked and secured and not missing, right? We only have a single chamber back here, so I shouldn't have no more than how much play? 1 inch, right? Good, so we're checking our push rod slack adjuster to make sure it has no more than 1 inch of play with the brakes on or off. Off, right? No more than 1 inch of play with the brakes off. If I have more than 1 inch of play, I need to grab an open 9/16 wrench, go to the adjusting nut, do a full turn circle clockwise until it stops, and then a quarter turn back. Once I'm done adjusting the brakes here, I adjust them on the other side to brake even. Okay. From there, I'm gonna go on to check the brake drums. My brake drums are not cracked, broken, or illegally welded, making sure that I don't see any white powder. Any white powder indicates that a fire extinguisher was used. Black powder indicates that there's metal to metal rubbing. Right? I'm also gonna make sure that I lost my train of thought. Right? I said brake pads already, right? Okay, no oil or grease. Any oil or grease would indicate that my inner axle seal is leaking and it has to be replaced. From there, I'm gonna check my rear tires, making sure there's no cuts, cracks, or bulges, no nails or screws to prevent a flat. My tire tread should be no less than 230 seconds. Recaps are permitted. The air pressure on my tire, 85 to 100 psi, or what's recommended by its manufacturer. Checking the spacing between the two tires to make sure it's free of wood, bottles, trash, etc. Checking the rim. My rim is not cracked, broken, no illegal welds. Lug nuts, full set of lug nuts, no rust in between them. If there's any rust, that indicates that they're loose, and then they have to be tightened. My hub seal is not cracked or broken, not leaking any oil. If it's leaking oil, it has to be replaced. Our valve stand not touching the rim, not cracked or broken. The cap is on there, tight and secure, listening for air leaks. From there, we're going on to the back of the trailer. Alright, I'm checking the back of my trailer to make sure that all the lights are the color red. There's no cracks broken, no missing glances, no burned out holes. I'm also making sure that the mud flaps are not too long or too short. If too long, they're up against the ground and get ruined. Too short, they don't work its purpose. Recommended adjustment, 6 inches off the ground. The DOT bar. The DOT bar is not cracked, broken. No illegal welds. The reflective tape is not ripped or torn. License plate, clean, visible, and fully lit. At this time, the same inspection I did on my driver's side, I would do on my passenger side. Would you like me to continue? No. Well, this concludes my exterior pre-trip inspection. That's it. Easy money. Questions?